What's up, sluts? No one really knows for sure elevator, Chaim. This is the Mazar. We live by 1830 5786, Tuesday, May 5th, 2026. Oh no, we gotta do the thing today? Fuck. 130 days as a bitch. $37.61 creation of the world, birth of Adam and Eve. 36:31 130 death, son of Adam was born. 35:26 235 Enosh, son of Seth was born. 34:36 325 Kenan, son of Enosh was born. 33:66 395 Mahalel, son of Kenan was born. 33:01 460 Yared, son of Mahalel was born. Yared. Where the fuck is douche's name was? Really, people don't give. I didn't give a fuck. When you said no one gives a fuck about that motherfucker, I didn't give a fuck about him. I care about him now, but I give a fuck about him. You're like, yeah, really? Why? Why West Side? Why not, bitch? This is the worst Kabbalah class ever. Really? Oh, it sucks. It's terrible. For how long have we been doing this, bitch? 130 days, motherfucker. Are we done? No, dog, it's the Omer count, bitch. Count today is Omer. Do a mitzvah in just 1 minute. Alright, so it's Barakatah denial. Hit him up. I'm share it to shout the mitzvah. Tivana al Sefer Omer. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. Today is 34 days of the Omer, which is 4 weeks and 6 days. May the merciful one restore unto us the Beit HaMikdash speedily in our days. Amen. Shalom. It's close though. May the merciful one restore unto us the service of the Beit HaMikdash to its place speedily in our days. Amen. Shalom. This is pretty good though. All right, is that it? This is coffee. Oh, come on, coffee. Oh man, we gotta do that thing that sucks. What? Really? Oh, it's terrible. Verification. This website uses security service to protect against malicious bots. Ad hominem attack. Why? It should say potentially malicious bots. Wait. No, it should say against super cool rabbis who want to use resources. Why? Dog, look at this athleticism, though. Dog, I vomited yesterday on camera, ripping Zuckerberg a new asshole. And now I've got sexy voice. What do you want me to do about it? Want to fight about it? Look at this move.
Jewish History. Line of Jewish History.
Mattis Cantor.
By Mattis Cantor. Art by Several Lightstone. Jewish history spans nearly 6,000 years, beginning with the creation, approximately 4,000 years before the Common Era.
Boring.
It continues through the eras of the Patriarch and the Second Temple era, which concluded with our being taken into exile yet again by the drought. study and our faith in GD and his promise of redemption were our constant companions. Secular Jewish year event in history. Minus 3,761 creation of the world. Birth of Adam and Eve, Chaba. Minus 3,631 130 Seth, son of Adam, was born. Minus 3,526 235 Enosh, son of Seth, was born. Minus 3,436 325 Kenan, son of Enosh, was born. Minus 3,366 395 Mehalil, son of Kenan, was born. Minus 3,301 460 Yer, son of Mehalil, was born. Minus 3,139 622 Chanuk, son of Yer, was born. Minus 3,074 687 Metushalach, son of Chanuk, was born. Minus 2,887 874 Lemech II, son of Metushalach, was born. Minus 2,831 930 Adam died. Minus 2,705 1,056 Noah, son of Lemech II, was born. Minus 2,225 1,536 Noah began the construction of the ark. Minus 2,205 was born. 557 Cham, son of Noah, was born. Minus 2,203 1,558 Shem, son of Noah, was born. Minus 2,156 Metushalach died. Minus 2,105 1,650 flood covered the earth. Minus 2,103 1,658 Arpachshad, son of Shem, was born. Minus 2068 1,693 Shalach, son of Arpachshad, born. Minus 2038 1,723 Eber, son of Shalach, was born. Minus 2004 1,757 Peleg, son of Eber, was born. Minus 1974 1,787 Reu, son of Peleg, was born. Minus 1942 1,819 Sirag, son of Reu, was born. Minus 1912 1,849 Nakarai, son of Sirag, was born. Minus 1,883 1,878 Terah, son of Nakarai, was born. The Forefathers. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1,813 1948 Abraham, son of Terah, was born. Minus 1,803 1958 Sarah, daughter of Haran, was born. Minus 1,788 1973 Abraham married Sarah. Minus 1,760 2000 Terah left Ur Kasdim with his family. Minus 1,755 2006 Noah died. Minus 1,740 2018 The Covenant, Brit Bain Habit and 23 Abraham settled in Canaan. Minus 1,727 2034 Ishmael, son of Abraham, was born. Minus 1,713 2048 Abraham circumcised himself and Ishmael. Minus 1,048 Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed. Minus 1,713 2048 Isaac, son of Abraham, was born. Minus 1,677 2084 The Acta, where Isaac was brought on the altar by Abraham. Minus 1,677 2084 Sarah died. Minus 1,653 2,108 Jacob and Esau were born. Minus 1,638 2,123 Abraham died. Minus 1,603 2,158 Shem, son of Noah, died. Minus 1,590 2,171 Isaac blessed Jacob instead of Esau. Minus 1,576 2,185 Jacob went to Haran. Minus 2,187 grandson of Shem, died. Minus 1,560 2,192 Jacob. 6,100 Levi, Jacob and Leah, was born. In 29 Joseph became Viceroy of Egypt. Minus 1,526 2,235 Kahat, was born. Minus 1,523 2,238 Jacob, and his family, went to Egypt. Living in Egypt. Secular year event in history. Minus 1506 2255 Jacob died. Minus 1429 2332 after Levi died. The enslavement in Egypt began. Minus 1393 2368 Moses was born. Minus 1355 2406 Joshua was born. Minus 1314 2447 Moses encountered the burning bush. Minus 1313 2448 the Jewish nation left Egypt. Traveling through the desert. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1313 2448 the Jewish nation crossed the Red Sea. Minus 1313 2448 the revelation at Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. Minus 1313 2448 Moses broke the tablets. Minus 1312 2449 Moshe came down 12 2449 tabernacle was erected. Minus 1312 2449 the spies returned from Canaan with bad news. 87 Agaron minus 1270 and 488 Moses died. Judges and early prophets. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 1273 2488 the Jews crossed Jordan into Canaan. Minus 1258 2500 and appointment of the land of Israel was completed. Minus 1245 2516 Joshua died. Minus 1228 2533 the rule of judges began with Othniel ben Kenaz. Minus 1188 2573 Ehud ben Gera became leader. Minus 1107 2654 Shamgar ben Anath died. Minus 1107 2654 Deborah became leader. Minus 1067 2694 Gideon became leader. Minus 1027 2734 Abimelech, son of Gideon, became leader. Minus 1024 2737 Tola, son of Pua, became leader. Minus 1003 2708 Jahir, the Jalidite, became leader. Minus 982 2779 Jephthah, Hagil Adi, became leader. Minus 969 2792 Elon, Hazabuloni, became leader. Minus 959 2802 Abdon ben Hillel became leader. Minus 931 2830 Eli the Cohen became leader. Minus 907 2854 David was born. Minus 892 2871 Samuel became leader. Kings and the Early Temple. Secular year Jewish year event in history. Minus 879 2082 Saul was appointed king. Minus 877 2884 David became king of Judah in Hebron. Minus 869 2892 David became king of Israel in Jerusalem. Minus 837 2924 Solomon became king. Minus 833 2928 the building of the first Beit Hamikdash commenced. Minus 827 2935 the first Beit Hamikdash was completed. Minus 797 2964 Solomon died and his kingdom was divided. Minus 797 2964 Rehoboam, son of Solomon, became king of Judah. Minus 797 2900 Oam ben Nebat became Israel. Minus 718 3043 Elijah went up in a chariot. Minus 6 Beit Hamikdash. Minus 642 Isaiah began his prophecy. Minus 574 3187 of the 10 tribes. 2 of the 10 tribes were exiled. Minus 5 399 Hezekiah became king of Judah. Minus 556 3205 the last of the 10 tribes were exiled. Minus 548 3213 Sennacherib invaded the land of Judah and retreated. 533 3228 Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, became king of Judah. Minus 463 3298 Jeremiah began his prophecies. Minus 458 3303 Josiah renovated the Beit Hamikdash. Minus 442 3319 Jerusalem was conquered and Jehoiakim, was exiled. Minus 443 321 Jehoiakim burned the Book of Lamentations composed by Jeremiah. Minus 434 3327 Jerusalem was conquered again and Jehoiakim was exiled. Minus 433 331 Jeremiah persisted in prophesying calamity. Minus 429 3,332 Ezekiel prophesied in exile. Minus 425 3,336 the final Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. Minus 420 and 23 3,330 and 23 3,338. First by Hamadash was destroyed. In 3,339 Gidop Anaki. Minus 421 3,340 Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar dream. Minus 410 3,352 Ezekiel prophesied about the future by Hamadash. Minus 302 3,389 You'll read the writing on the wall. Minus 372 3,389 Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. Minus 371 3,390 Zerubbabel led the return to the land of Israel. Minus 373,391 building of second Beit Hamikdash commenced. Then halted. Minus 366 3,395 Akashverosh II made his great banquet. Minus 362 3,399 Esther was taken to the palace. Minus 357 3,404 Esther took action against Haman's decree. Minus 355 3,406 Mordecai proclaimed the celebration of Purim. Minus 353 3,408 building of the second Beit Hamikdash resumed. Minus 349 3,412 the second Beit Hamikdash was completed. Building of the second Holy Temple. 213 returned to the land of Israel. Minus 335 3,426 Nehemiah returned to rebuild walls of Jerusalem. Minus 313 the Maccabee ruled. Minus 139 3,622 the second Beit Hamikdash was rededicated. Minus 138 3,623 Hanukkah was declared a festival. Minus 133 3,628 Judah the Maccabee was killed in battle. Minus 133 3,628 Yonatan, son of Mattityahu, ruled. Minus 127 3,634 Shimon, son of Mattityahu, ruled. Minus 119 3,642 Yohanan Harkanos, son of Shimon, ruled. Minus 93 3,668 Judah Aristobulus, son of Yochanan Harkanos, ruled. Minus 91 3,670 Alexander Yaneh, son of Yochanan Harkanos, ruled. Minus 73 3,688 Queen Shalom Salome Alexandra, wife of Alexander Yaneh, ruled. Minus 65 3,696 Aristobulus II, son of Alexander Yaneh, ruled /TD. Minus 61 3,700 the Romans gained control of Judea. Minus 61 3,700 Harkanos II, son of Alexander Yaneh, ruled. Minus 43,721 Antigonus, Aristobulus II, ruled. This event in history. Minus 36 3,725 Herod ruled. 33 3,728 Hillel became the leader of the Torah scholars. Minus 19 3,742 Herod I began rebuilding second Beit Hamikdash. Minus 11 3,750 renovation of the second Beit Hamikdash was completed. 1 3,761 Archelaus ruled. 8 368 Hillel died. 10 3,770 Archelaus was deposed by the Roman Emperor. 21 3,781 Agrippa I, grandson of Herod I, ruled. 28 3,788 the Sanhedrin moved from the second Hamikdash. 44 3,804 Agrippa II, son of Agrippa I, ruled. 53,810 Rabban Gamliel I, son of Shimon, grandson of Hillel, died. 66 3,826 Vespasian arrived in Judea to reassert Roman authority. 69 3,829 the second Beit Hamikdash was destroyed. The Talmudic era. The Mishnah. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 74 3,834 are Yohanan ben Zakkai died. 86 3,846 the Sanhedrin moved from place to place, under Gamliel II. 133 3,893 Bader fell, and the Bar Kokhba revolt ended in tragedy. 134 3,894 Judaism was banned, and Akiva was imprisoned. 189 3,949 Judah Hanasi completed the Mishnah around this time. Jewish year event in history. 219 3,979 Rab left the land of Israel and settled in Babylonia. 247 4007 Shmuel was the Talmudic authority in Babylonia. 254 4014 Yohanan was the leading Talmudic authority. 294,050 Huna was the leading Talmud authority. 298 4058 Yehuda was the leading Talmudic authority. 304,060 Kista was the leading Talmudic authority. 309 4069 Rabba was the leading Talmudic authority. 321 4081 Yosef was the leading Talmudic authority. 325 4085 Ababi was the leading Talmudic authority. 338 4098 Rabba was the leading Talmudic authority. 359 4119 Hillel II, who established the calendar, became Nasi. 392 4152 Ashi was the leading Talmudic authority. 427 4187 Ashi died after the compilation. 475 4035 The Talmud was complete when Ravina II died. The Rabbanan. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 551 4311 Mar Zutra proclaimed Jewish self-rule in Babylonia. The Janim. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 589 4009 Talmudic Academy of Surah was reconstituted. 614 4374 The Persians conquered the land of Israel. 614 4374 The Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. 629 4389 The Byzantine land of Israel. 636 4396 Yitzhak was the last Jayon of Nehardeh, Firashuber. 637 4397 The Arabs conquered the land of Israel. 645 4405 One of the Takanat Hajanim was enacted at this time. 755 4515 Jayon left Iraq for the land of Israel. 759 4519 Yehuda became Jayon of Surah. 759 4519 The Halachat Bidalat, B.A. Hag, was written at this time. 788 4548 Another of the Takanat Hajanim was enacted at this time. 858 4618 Aramrum, who wrote the Siddur. 928 4688 Rabbi was appointed Jayon of Surah. 955 4708 1088 4848 The river arrived in Spain from Morocco. 1096 4856 The Crusaders destroyed Jewish communities. 1099 4000 Jerusalem was captured by the 1003 4863 The Rip died. 1105 4865 Rashi died. And the era of the Tosafot began. 1135 4895 The Rambam, Maimonides, was born. 1144 4904 The first, recorded, blood libel took place. 1147 4907 The Crusaders attacked Jewish communities. 1147 4907 Rabbi Anutam was captured by the Crusaders. 1148 4908 The Rambams and the Radak's families left Cordova. 1165 4925 The Rambam visited the land of Israel. 1171 4931 Rabbi Anutam died. 1175 4935 The Rashbam died. 1184 4944 The young son of the Ri was killed. 1187 4948 Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. 1189 4949 Yaakov d'Orleans was killed in London. 1190 450 Jews were massacred in the Third Crusade. 1191 4951 Rabbi David Kimchi, known as the Radak, wrote his commentary. 1194 4954 the was 4,059 the Aryabhat died. 1204 4965 the Rambam died. 1236 4996 rampaging mobs massacred Jews in France. 1242 5002 a massive burning of the Talmud took 1244 5004 Jerusalem was sacked by Egyptians and Turks. 1252 5012 the Inquisition began to use torture. 1267 5027 the Ramban left Spain and settled in the land of Israel. 1275 5030 the Ramban died. 186 5046 the Maher Amir Rothenberg was imprisoned. 1295 5050 new works advanced the study of Kabbalah. 1295 5050 the era of the Tosafot concluded at around this time. Later Rishonim. Persecutions and expulsions. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1295 5050 all Jews were expelled from England. 1293 5053 the Maher Amir Rothenberg died in prison. 1298 5058 the Rheinfleisch massacres began. 1298 5058 the author of the Mordecai and Haggahat Maimoniyot were killed. 1305 5065 the Rashba placed a limited ban on philosophy. 1305 5065 the Rosh and his son, the Tu-1066 all Jews were expelled from France. 1310 5070 the Rashba died. 1325 5080 Jews were massacred by the Posteros Crusaders. 1327 5088 died. 1336 5090 Jews of Germany were massacred by the armed bands. 1338 5098 the Ralbag wrote his commentary on the Bible. 1349 5109 the Black Death massacres swept across Europe. 1367 5127 the Ran. Reibisch, and other scholars in Spain were imprisoned. 1391 5151 Jews of Spain were massacred. Many were forced to convert. 1391 5151 the Reibisch and Rashbats left Spain. 1394 5155 the final expulsion of Jews from France. 1413 5173 R. Yosef Albo was in a forced debate with Christians. 1421 5181 Jews in Austria were massacred in the Wiener Gezira. 1475 5235 the invention of printing was used for Jewish books. 1481 5241 the Inquisition was established in Spain. 1488 5248 died a burden of settled into 1551. Columbus consulted R. Abraham Zacuto for 1492 thousand Jews were expelled from Spain and Sicily. The great scholars of the Shul year Jewish year event. 1403 5253 R. Itzhak Barbanel arrived in from Spain. 1496 5257 all Jews. Real. 1525 5285 R. Yosef Yasselman saved many Jews during the Pence War. 1553 5314 a mass burning of Jewish books took place in Rome. 1563 5323 the Shulchan Aruch was 1575 330 the 1573 5333 Maharil came to Prague. 1573 5334 the Maharshal died. 1575 5335 Yosef Karo died in Safat. 5359 the Matu Prague again. 1614 5374 the Maharsha became rabbi in Lublin. 1616 5377 the Tosafot Yom Tov commentary was concluded. 1021 5302 the Shallow arrived in the land of Israel. 1625 389 R. Yom Tov Lippmann Heller was imprisoned in Prague. And 45,400 R. Yoel Zirks. The Bach. Died. 1,646 5,406 The Shach and Taz, on Shulchan Aruch, were ended. 1,648 5,408 Jews were massacred by Shmuel Maki's forces. Early Karanim and East European massacres. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1,654 5,414 The first Jews settled in New Amsterdam, New York. 1,655 5,415 Many Jews killed in Russian and Swedish invasions of Poland. 1,656 5,000 were in England. 1,656 5,416 Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated. 1,673 5,433 The Magen Abraham, on Shulchan Aruch, was completed. 1,676 530 Tzvi died as a Muslim. 1,689 5,449 The Beit Shmuel, on the Shulchan Aruch. Shem Tov was born. 1,702 5,403 The Nia Yahushua's family was killed in explosion. 1,712 5,004 Sitei Chachamin was arrested. 1,784 Ardad Yaakov Kulai, Miam Loizi, arrived in Constantinople. 1,727 5,487 The Mishnah Elimelech died. 1,494 Jews were massacred by the Haidamach bands. Akaranim and early Hasidim. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1,741 5,501 The Or Hashayim arrived in the land of Israel. 1,747 5,507 Ar Moshe Haim Luzito, Runkel, died in Akko, Acre. 1,755 510 Ar Jonathan Beskuds became rabbi in Hamburg. 1,754 5,515 Ar Yechezkel Landau, known as the Noda by Yehuda, became rabbi in Prague. 1,757 5,518 The Frankists instigated mass burnings of the Talmud. 1,759 5,519 Frankists supported blood libel charges in public debate. 1,765 520 The Baal Shem Tov died. 1,764 5,500 continued. 1,768 5,528 despite resistance. The Haidamachs massacred thousands. 1,770 died. 1,782 5,542 R.N. Adler and Chatham Sofer visited the Noda by Yehuda. 1,786 5,546 R. Elimelech of Lizansk died. 1,791 5,551 The Pale of Settlement was established in Russia. 1,793 5,553 Jews suffered in reign of terror of French Revolution. 1,797 5,558 The Vilna Gaon died. 1,798 5,559 The Bal Hadanya was released from first imprisonment. 1,799 5,559 Napoleon led an army expedition through the land of Israel. 1,806 5,566 The Judah, Arhaim Yosef David Ajalai, died. 1,806 5,566 The Chatham Sofer became rabbi in Pressburg. 1,809 5,570 R. Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev died. 1,810 5,571 R. Nachman of Breslov died. 1,814 5,574 R. Akiva became rabbi in Posen. 1,814 5,570 both. 1,805 5,575 Joseph of Lublin and R. Mendel of Rimano both died. 1,000 Germany. 1,827 5,587 Russia began conscripting Jewish children to the army. 1,845 R. Yisrael of Ruzin was released from imprisonment. Later Akaranim and the Changing Society. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1,843 5,600 Samach Tzedek of Lubavitch was 1,006 5,606 Sir Moshe Montefiore visited Russia to help local Jews. 1,848 5,600 Yisrael Salander left Vilna. 5,619 R. Menachem Mendel of Kotsk died. 164 5,624 The Malbim was imprisoned, and then expelled from Romania. 1,866 5,626 Judashe Haram, Tiferet Shlomo, and Samach Tzedek died. 1873 5633 The Chapit's Time was published. 1874 5634 The Minchat Chinook died. 1878 5638 Petah agricultural settlement was established. 1881 5641 Many Jews began leaving Russia after a wave of pogroms. 1886 5646 Ar Shlomo Gans Fried, author of Keetzer Shulchan Aruch, died. 1892 5652 Arheim, Brisker, became rabbi in Brisk. 1905 5665 The Sfat Emet died. 1905 5665 Many Jews were killed in official Russian pogroms. 1911 5671 Chazanish was published. 1914 5674 Over 500,000 Jewish soldiers fought in World War I. 1918 5678 Over 60,000 Jews were killed during the Russian Revolution. 1923 5684 The Daf Hayomi study cycle commenced. 1927 5687 The 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe was released from Soviet prison. 1938 5699 Jews were attacked in the Kristallnacht pogroms in Germany. The Holocaust. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1939 5699 Germany started World War II. And mass killing of Jews. 1941 5701 Nazi and 200,000 Jews were killed at Babi Yar and Ponary. 1942 5702 400,000 Jews of Warsaw were sent to death camps. 1943 5703 The remaining Jews in Warsaw staged a massive uprising. 1943 5703 Jewish uprisings at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Bialystok. 1943 5703 The Danish people quietly rescued 93% of their Jews to safety. 1944 5704 300,000 Hungarian Jews were killed in 3 months. 1944 5705 Uprising in Auschwitz death camp just before freedom. 1945 5705 Nazi Germany was conquered. And World War II ended. 1945 5705 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis during the war. The modern state of Israel. Secular year Jewish year event in history. 1947 5707 Publication of the Talmud Encyclopedia was commenced. 1947 5708 The United Nations divided Israel. 1947 5708 Arabs attacked Israel to gain territory. 1948 5708 The State of Israel was established. 1948 5708 Israel was invaded by many Arab countries. 1949 5709 The War of Independence in Israel ended. Unity of Iraq. 1955 5710 Almost all Jews of Yemen emigrated to Israel. 1951 5711 The Lubavitcher Rebbe accepts the mantle of leadership. 1956 Jewish forces invaded Egypt and conquered the Sinai Desert. 1967 5727 The Lubavitcher Rebbe established the Tefillin campaign. 1967 5727 Jerusalem reunited under Jewish rule in the Six-Day War. 1973 5734 2,500 Jewish soldiers were killed in the Yom Kippur War. 1974 5734 The Lubavitcher Rebbe established the Shabbat Candle campaign. 1982 5742 massive enemy arsenals were discovered in Lebanon. 1987 5746 The first international conference of Chabad Lubavitch emissaries. 1993 5753 A secret agreement signed in Oslo. 1994 5754 The Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away. 2008 5767 Deadly terrorist attack at the Chabad house in Mumbai, India, kill 6. 2020 5780 Israel signed Abraham Accords, normalizing relations with UAE and Bahrain, soon followed by Sudan and Morocco.
I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel and to the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. It means, but only should serve as a springboard for deeper study and reflection, and hopefully it will also enable you in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Tia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics of esotericism, and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy by joining my Patreon, or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your participation. Folks, well, welcome back. Welcome back. We're going to get to the, in some ways, the high watermark of the Kabbalah tonight. I think the high water relation of Kabbalah has basically become Jewish theology. That's something I think that, you can't really shake a stick at that. It's a really incredible thing that fundamentally one guy, in many ways, formulated how Jews all over the world understand their God, understand their scriptures, understand the world that they live in. And it's a glorious version of the Kabbalah. It's so deeply embedded in Judaism that phrases like tikkun olam, a phrase that I bet everybody in this class has heard a dozen times. Shuls have tikkun olam committees. This idea directly fits that story. So many ideas that are commonplaces in Judaism really emerge from Gloria. And so tonight we'll get to his ideas. Now not going to exhaustively deal with his ideas for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that most of his books aren't even translated into English. The vast majority are not translated into English, and even the books that remain in Hebrew are so technical and so different that I have to admit, often I can read pages of books and still not know quite what in the world's going on. These books are developed with people trying to make sense of what the world is talking about. And so part of what happens is that books are very complicated, and that the complicatedness is it has its own life. So we'll talk about that a little bit to get to Zechariah. But to rewind a little bit, talk about this period that I sometimes refer to as the interregnum. That's the period after the composition of the Zohar, but before the rise of Lurianic Kabbalah. What we have is that in that period, Kabbalah didn't really spread very quickly. It was a very underground, it was a very elite, it was a very hush-hush kind of thing. That's not to say that people weren't publishing things and talking about Kabbalistic ideas, but there was no desire to make it public. It was a very hush-hush, elite, esoteric practice, very much so. And by 1492, with the Alhambra Decree, which declared that basically all Muslim Jews had to leave Spain or convert, you have the Kabbalah transforming from being a very elite, very inner, very inward-looking, very secretive kind of thing to the Kabbalah actually becoming imbued with a very eschatological, that's to say, that's the end of the world and very messianic meanings. And so in the aftermath of the disaster that was 1492, Kabbalah is going to branch out into the world. It's going to become popularized. And many of the refugees, which I don't know why that doesn't get more press, but it should, Bayezid II was the Muslim leader of the Empire that basically sent the entire fleet to Spain and saved everything. He may have been that too, but he realized that you kick all your doctors, lawyers, and scientists out of a country. Of course, he wanted them, and he was right to do it. The Ottoman Empire saw a huge boom from the importation of the refugees after the 1442 Alhambra Decree. By the way, you can also notice that Spain didn't do terribly good in many ways in the aftermath of that either. So many of these Jews are going to settle in the Ottoman Empire. One of the main places they're going to settle is going to be in Salonika. Salonika and Warsaw have been traditionally known as the only two Jewish cities in the world. And so Salonika and Greece is going to be one of the places they're going to settle. But many of the Kabbalistically inclined people are actually going to move to the place they're most familiar with, at least in their sort of imaginary landscape. And that's up in the Galilee at a place called Tzfat near Meron, where Shimon Bar Yochai is the traditional author of the Zohar, was thought to be buried. And it's there at Meron and Tzfat, or Tzfat, where new forms of Kabbalah begin to emerge. Kabbalah begins to be popularized. This is a very important moment in the history of Kabbalah. To teach it publicly at some level. Classes Kabbalah. And when Kabbalah that is highly systematized, highly intellectualized, very encyclopedic, and very synthetic, which is just to say that it's organizing all kinds of Kabbalistic ideas. So the major one is going to be Joseph Cordovero. I think it's just a moment. Of course, other forms of Kabbalah also existed at this time. We talked at length last time about Abulafia and his so-called ecstatic prophetic Kabbalah. This is a completely other form of Kabbalah that doesn't really care much about the Sefirot and that kind of stuff. He knows about them and he's aware of them and he's interested in them. But that's not part and parcel of his project. His project is a kind of intellectual communion with the divine, and that's accomplished by a wide range of things like breathing techniques and focusing in on Hebrew combinations of Hebrew words and various kinds of mantra-like structures. So there are other forms of Kabbalah that came about in the milieu of the Zohar that didn't quite make it. Now, what's going to be really important is that in the Safed milieu, in the Safedian form of Kabbalah, Isaac Luria and his student Chaim Vital are going to reincorporate some of Abulafia's ideas. That's going to basically save Abulafia from oblivion. Remember, he got basically excommunicated and exiled to a tiny island, Corsica, and he kind of vanished from he dies. He's that the 1492 Alhambra Decree was the beginning of the end, and that Kabbalah, the unveiling of Kabbalah to a kind of trend, and old event would be led by Kabbalistic speculation. It would urge in the Messiah. And in fact, there were many people at that time, Rivera being one, Zach Vital being another one, Zach Luria being another, that many people, including those people themselves, thought they were the Messiah. Chaim Vital, we actually have some of his notes. He even says in his notes that, if I just studied the Mishnah a little longer, I would have become the Messiah. I know it. So these guys are really convinced that the Messiah is not just around the corner, but they might be it. And that kind of idea that you might be the Messiah and you might be in the Messianic age is going to be hugely important as we get to next time when we get to Shabbatai Tzvi and his mystical heresy that leads people to believing that he's the Messiah. So Shabbatai Tzvi is next week. Next time. So as I said, since that's the time period where Kabbalah is being popularized, it's the time period where Kabbalah is being opened up to the masses at some level. I say the masses being opened up to really elite dudes. It's not being opened up to everybody. Their new service is invented, Kabbalat Shabbat, almost certainly the most popular Jewish service that exists today. Into a Jewish service, you can probably get into a Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat service. That service being developed this time, and Shlomo Alphabet's make writes the centerpiece of that text, that prayer service, L'Chavidi, my beloved, come my bride, and that text by Shlomo Alphabet. Also, it's worth pointing out that together they married sisters and stuff. Joseph Cordovero, Shlomo Alphabet's daughter. So, Vero imagine some couples drama that must have precipitated in their circles. I would have loved to see the couples drama, but unfortunately, a lot of that doesn't survive. He's got a rough idea about what some of these texts look like. So this is Pardes Romim. This is the main text of Joseph Cordovero. This is the central text of the Cordoverian system of Kabbalah. A rough idea about how dense it is, about that long. Right? So it's a substantial text. This doesn't have any commentary, by the way. It's just a straight text. And if you want to get a sense of what this looks like inside, it's pretty dense all the wall. So these texts are Pardes Romim is an incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging text to try to read. There is no translation of this into English at all. I don't think there's no systematic translation for sure. And these texts, many of these foundational texts of Kabbalah, still do not have English translations, which is kind of mind-blowing considering how popular some version of Kabbalah is. And many of the foundational texts aren't available in English. Even finding copies in Hebrew is challenging. So this one is the early systematization of in Cordovero. And again, these texts are super difficult, and finding English translations in these don't exist. They're just straightforward, they don't exist. Studying Kabbalah in the original languages is basically what you have to do if you're going to get really deep into Kabbalah's main text. You're going fundamentally in Hebrew Kabbalah texts. So, beginning of the 15th century, not only are Jews interested in Kabbalah, but Christians are too. This is a strange turn of events, but it's really important in the development of Western Christian spirituality, especially esoteric spirituality. As you, I'm sure, know, by the 15th century, there was a movement in Italy that we call the Renaissance or whatever. But what we have is the arrival of a great deal of new texts that are being imported from Greece. I said new, they're actually really old texts. But they're being imported into Italy, and what's happening is that many of these old texts, they are underwriting an idea that's going on, that in order to get sort of a pure intellectual reality or pure intellectual appreciation of what's going on in the world, we need to go back in time to look at the original text, the original foundation of this literature. This is sometimes called Dante's revival, Dorsch's revival. And what you get is a massive tragic led like Chino, who are trainer works, for instance, played and so you have an enormous influx of new, old ideas coming in from Greece in the 15th century. And there was an idea that was current at the time that primordial wisdom was somehow more reliable than what was going on in the Middle Ages. In fact, it's the Renaissance humanists are going to refer to that time period before them as the Gothic. The Goths, of course, were the people that destroyed the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire. And the humanists really hated these people. They thought they were backwards, superstitious. Their writing was incomprehensible, etc. And so there was a long idea of the Renaissance humanists that the Middle Ages basically was a mistake. All of the scholasticism, all of it was a mistake. And so what we need to do is go back to the original Latin and Greek writers and learn from the original sources, not through a bunch of commentaries. Cut all that out and go back to read just the original sources. And so this ad fontes approach also included a great deal of what's going on in Jewish writing as well. Because Christians believe that fundamentally Christianity had emerged from Judaism, and that there was primordial wisdom to be had by the Jews, and that primordial wisdom captured things that perhaps Christianity had not quite covered. And so Kabbalah fit that bill, because that's exactly what Kabbalah claims to be. It claims to be primordial wisdom given to and eventually transferred into the Sefer Zohar. And so the idea is that the Kabbalah was one form of this primordial wisdom, along with Zoroastrianism and Plato, and these sort of things. And so there was an idea that Kabbalah had secrets that had been preserved by the Jews, but the Jews had preserved them, but they didn't understand them. Because of course the Jews are backwards, blind people who reject the Messiah and don't understand anything. And so the idea was that the Jews had all this Kabbalah that the Jews really didn't understand. And so these Christians really began to turn their attention to the Kabbalah, and they began to recruit non-Jews, that is to say, former Jews who have converted to Christianity, or Jews who are kind of amenable to this sort of humanistic project. And so we have converted Jews, converso folks like Lysias and like these communities, and we also have just Jews who are just kind of cool with learning together, folks like Yochanan and Elmela. And what ends up happening is that many of the texts of Kabbalah slowly begin to be translated from Hebrew and Aramaic into Latin. And as those texts begin to get translated into Latin, Christians begin to see that, one, there's something really, really interesting and really captivating about the Kabbalah, and two, they begin to believe that the Kabbalah actually proves the truth as a way of accessing primordial wisdom, but also part of what is sometimes referred to as the Latin polemical tradition, where Jewish texts are more used. The Kabbalah is actually mined for all kinds of Trinitarian ideas. The first three Sefirot are actually the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and all kinds of other ideas where the basic structure is that underneath the hood of Kabbalah is actually a kind of mystical Christianity. The Jews just can't see it. And so what ends up happening is a lot of these texts begin to be translated from Hebrew and Aramaic into Latin. And this begins to form a time period where some of these early Christian Kabbalists are combining ideas from Plato, ideas from the Hermetic world, the ideas from Hermes Trismegistus. They're beginning to combine ideas from Kabbalah. They're beginning to form synthetic versions of Christianity, as you can imagine, are pretty controversial. So Kabbalah becomes one of the admixtures by which a new kind of Christianity began to emerge, a kind of esoteric Christianity begins to emerge in the 15th century. And some of the doctrines of these are some pretty famous folks, at least in the history of mysticism. These are going to be folks like fundamentally synthesized all knowledge. Kabbalah, Christianity, Pythagoreanism, everything. He thought he had systematized every form of knowledge into a coherent system of 900 theses, and that he basically said, I want to debate people about this. I'll show you that I'm right. And his Kabbalistic theses are among some of the earliest examples of Christian Kabbalah, and they are at the pinnacle of the book. They come at the very, very end. There's the final theses, and the 900 theses, and he really thinks that Kabbalah has really landed on some of these things in a way that no one else has. Francesco Giorgi is also a really early systematic incorporator of Hermetic and Kabbalistic ideas into Christianity. His works are really, really difficult to access. I don't think they've been translated to English, and they are some of the earliest examples of systematic analysis of Christianity using Kabbalah as a lens. Athanasius Kircher, of course, the famous German polymath, also integrated Kabbalah into his thinking, and his version of the Tree of Life, its time, has gone on to basically become the standard one in the Christian occult world, or the occult world more generally. Folks who exist in places like the Bold Dawn, or the often actually visible back to folks like Athanasius Kircher or to Rothschild. Rothschild very important scholar of Hebrew. Two works, they were Fikio and the Arte Kabbalistica, are systematic refutations of both Kabbalistic ideas, but also Kabbalistic texts translated in their entirety into Hebrew. Many non-Jews whose first encounter with Kabbalah was almost certainly going to be a translation of the Kabbalistica, and that, or another version, another text is Kabbalah de Verdata, the Kabbalah Unveiled, by Christian Northern Rosenroth. You see a bunch of these guys with Germans. The Germans were pretty interested in this, and in fact, many people have made the argument that the Protestant Reformation has its origins in this kind of touch with Kabbalah. That Kabbalah is sort of the escape velocity that the Protestant Reformation at some level needs to get away from Catholicism, and that the bridge at some level away from Catholicism, the gravitational pull away from Catholicism at some level in a very early strata was Kabbalah. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that Martin Luther was terribly interested in Kabbalah. He wasn't. Ball of wax. At any rate, Kabbalah de Verdata, occult philosophy, was a standard text in the Renaissance on occult philosophy and magic. Virtually all magic practitioners now in the West, magic is a part of their spiritual practice, almost certainly trace all of their theory back to some level to Grippa. So Grippa's books, history books on occult philosophy are foundational, and Grippa integrates Kabbalah into distinct seamlessly, deeply connected to ideas and Kabbalah. So what I want to point out is that Christians are also interested in Kabbalah. I think I mentioned this maybe a couple times ago, that the first time that the Zohar was printed, it was printed in a single volume at Cremona at the behest of Christians. Christians wanted it. It wasn't Jews trying to get it printed. The Jewish version was printed in Mantua just about a year later in 3 volumes, which is still standard now to print the Zohar in 3 volumes. The Cremona 1-volume edition was basically printed at the behest of Christians, and it's extremely rare. I think I saw one at auction a couple of years ago for $200,000 or something. It's a very rare volume. At any rate, just to say that Kabbalah isn't just affecting the Jews, it's also deeply affecting Christians. Christians are also really interested in Kabbalah, and what's going to end up happening is that will form a trajectory by which or occult sides. Kabbalah has its own life, and eventually comes to become a new form of Kabbalah called Hermetic Kabbalah, which is very influential in occult circles, primarily Let's go back to Safed. Right? Let's go back to Safed. Safed's really the stage that the stage all this is playing out. So Moshe ben Yaakov Cordovero is going to die, as all people do. And so his death in some ways signals the end of one process, one cycle of Kabbalistic development. And I will say that you can, in some sense, divide Kabbalistic history into 2 big phases. The first phase is from the early Kabbalah, Zohar, all the way to Cordovero. That's one section of Kabbalah. The rest of Kabbalah of what comes next. And what comes next is Gloria. Gloria arrived actually at Safed from where he grew up, primarily in Egypt. He arrived at Safed, according to legend, at least on the very day that Cordovero died, and as the funeral train was making its way to the graveyard, which you can still go see Cordovero's tomb in Safed. I've seen it right there. You can make your way to Cordovero's tomb, and the funeral train allegedly, as like Gloria said, saw a pillar of fire rising in front of the funeral train. Now, for folks who know some Bible, you'll recognize that immediately, right? That's how God appeared to the Israelites during the Exodus. That God appeared to the Israelites as a pillar of fire. And so, literally, it's like Gloria says that God appeared before the funeral train of Cordovero as a pillar of fire, and Gloria settled Safed. Gloria's life prior, a couple of years before he died, unremarkable. His father died when he was relatively young. He was raised by his maternal in Egypt. His father, his uncle, is actually relatively wealthy guy. Gloria with a very quality Jewish education, and in his 20s, Gloria obtains what seems to be an early copy of the Zohar. And Joram is completely infatuated with it. In fact, so infatuated that he basically goes derelict. He was supposed to become a business person. He just abandons that. He had married, and he just basically abandons his wife. And he just kind of spends most of his days meditating out in a hut near the Nile. And it's during those years, those 15 or some odd years of him meditating on the Nile in this hut that he built for himself, again, he seems to formulate the idea that at some point he has a kind of mystical proof. I mean, even his birth heralded by the life of the prophet. At any rate, Gloria would eventually make his way back to Jerusalem, and then he would eventually make his way to South, arriving, as I said, on the day of Cordevero's death. And he would spend a couple of years, just a couple of years, probably for 3 years, and he died in a flame that burns twice as bright on this guy was burned out. Titanic individual is, which is shockingly original. Well, with Cordovero dead, many people, I think, did believe that Cordovero was the Messiah when he died. It was a real big disappointment that but when Cordovero died, there was the idea that something else coming. Cordovero was a herald, maybe Elijah, for the coming Messiah. And the Gloria fit into that. Gloria began to teach Kabbalah basically every day. He had introductory level Kabbalah classes. Come to Gloria's Kabbalah Academy and learn intro Kabbalah. He also began to develop an inner circle of people that he teaches all night to. And the inner circle is composed of several students. We know a good bit about those students. And what's weird is that he seems to have taught different versions of things to different students. And we know that because they say so, that some people are allowed some things, some people are allowed others, some part of the system, some others. And we can see this in the publications because, for instance, one of Gloria's students, Israel Saru, who doesn't really pay attention to him, we talk. But Israel Saru was one of the earliest publishers of it's like Gloria worked rather published in Italy and popularized them. On with Isaac Gloria, really wants Kabbalistic ideas popularized. That's probably part of his sort of general message. It's in a very intense way, in that if Kabbalah gets out there, you usher in the Messianic age. That kind of Messianic is going to prove to be a disaster. So Messianic fervor is almost all. It's going to be a disaster. At any rate, the Arizal himself, it's like Gloria basically wrote nothing. He wrote a couple of Aramaic poems. It's all for Shabbat. That's all he had. He didn't really write much. He taught, and his students sort of synthesized things that he taught. And it's a synthesized documents of it. There's a long tradition of this kind of thing, right? Buddha never wrote anything down. Jesus never wrote anything down. Muhammad couldn't read or write. There's a whole long tradition of people. Socrates famously never wrote anything. There's a whole long tradition of people who don't write things down and yet go on to change the world. So if you really want to change the world, don't write books. Writing books is a surefire way that you will not change the world. You have to be a charismatic leader and don't write anything. Talk to people. And if you talk to people and you're charismatic enough, they will do all the writing for you. And you you know. But again, it's like Gloria was only there in something for 2 or 3 years, and he managed to make this kind of decisive movement through his student clientele. So, what do we know about the system of Gloria? Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, I'm not going to get systematically go through every part of it because it is incredibly difficult and morose in its detail. But the main thing to know about it is that whereas Cordovero was moving in a much more rationalistic, much more intellectualistic, much more systematic direction when it comes to trying to unpack the ideas of the Sefer Zohar, Florian is much more interested on the mythos of the Zohar. He's much more interested in the evolving process the Zohar seems to describe about how God goes from being infinitely recessed to becoming present. And so Luria's main shift is it's going to shift away from trying to systematically analyze every aspect of how reality was constructed, but rather focus on the unfolding, the dynamic unfolding of reality and the mythology of that unfolding. And it's the mythology, and I say mythology, I don't mean falseness or like the Loch Ness Monster is a myth, but it's the doing of it that really matters to him. Because for Luria, the entire drama of the unfolding or the evolution of reality as we know it isn't in the past, it's always present to us. And so in a way that the Cordovero might describe that the events of the unfolding of the universe, be it the Sephirot or events in the past, the primordial past, and the physical past, for Luria, time is really weird because for him, it's all happening at once. It's happened back then, it's happening now, at some level, it's kind of happening in the future. The future's kind of reaching for us to redeem us. And so even notions like time are very Lurianic system. I'm really interested in what I call the mythological structure, the genesis of reality, development as that development in a given moment in the development of humanity or God. For Luria, the development of God and the development of humanity are coming together. They're the same development. His system, as far as we have it, is a really highly developed system of analyzing reality, so that it's always terribly coherent, and I certainly can't say that I always understand it, but what he's focused on, what his core idea is what often gets called the order of development, or the order of evolution. This is often referred to as the Seder Hishtachlut, the order of evolution. In fact, the Hishtachlut is actually a standard modern Hebrew word for evolution and many evolutions. So it's the evolution of reality. Now, just again, these evolutionary models are constructive, right? Because at some level, biological entities contain the past inside them. That is to say that you contain all kinds of things in your DNA from what we used to be. We're not apes like the apes before us, but we contain DNA fragments of those apes. The past is still with us. As Bill Faulkner said, isn't dead, it's not more Lurianic. The idea, yes, there are things happening in the primeval past, the primordial past, but those things are current to us now, still happening. And so what we get is that there is a sort of spiraling cycle of aggression. That is to say, the world is coming into being, the world is emerging as such, always emerging as such, and further right, it's also regressing, it's also going back to the way that it was. So there is an incredible dynamism in the Lurianic system where you kind of don't know quite where you are in time, in space. You don't quite know where you are even in righteousness sometimes. There's a kind of constant movement to and fro where the world is on the one hand becoming exiled and on the other hand is becoming redeemed. And so the Lurianic system, part of what makes it so difficult is that at the heart of the system is this dialectical structure where everything is happening all at once and everything is also being erased all at once. And so it's very difficult to figure out at what moment something is happening, because at every moment, everything's on. And so knowing exactly what's going on in the system is very complicated, because the system is so dynamic, and it's almost like a fractal. The more you zoom in on a region of the fractal, the more the entire fractal reproduces. And so the system is very, very fractalized like that. And so it's often difficult to know exactly what's going on. But let's go over the core ideas of Gloria. The big first idea is his concept of Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum was an idea that was developed by Cordovero, actually. In fact, Cordovero was a teacher of Gloria for a brief time, I think, 15th century. And so Cordovero had to solve a problem. The problem is, well, how do you get from an infinite God whose light reaches every metaphysical, ontological aspect of reality? God's being is infinite, and so it must occupy every point within that infinity. How do you get to an idea that there's a gap? How do you get to the idea there's a place where God isn't in order for the world to be? Because it can't be the case that God is completely in fullness, then the system's full, and you can't have a world. You can't have the Olamot, you can't have the worlds. So God has to create an emptiness, a divine emptiness, a vacuum. And what God does is God contracts some region of God's self. I use words like region, but again, these spatial concepts are not accurate. But God ontologically contracts God's self, and that ontological contraction creates a void. And that void is both surrounded by God and yet is not God. It's a kind of gap. It's a kind of void or a vacuum. I don't know, always imagine you gained a couple pounds and you need to get in some old pants, and so you like suck your belly in and tighten your belt real tight. It's like God, so sucking in God to get the belt on or something. I don't know how to. I always imagine that for some reason. So God creates this void, this Tzimtzum, and into that Tzimtzum, into that void, into that contraction, that will be where the Olamot appear. The Olamot are the four worlds that comprise our reality. We do not have access to God's infiniteness. We just don't. We're finite. We do not have access to God's infiniteness. And so what we do have access to is what's left over from the process of filling that void. Now, how does that void get filled? Well, God, it's almost like a laser. God concentrates some of God's light. God finitizes some of God's light. And that finitized light, that finitized existence of God is permitted to enter into the void. And when it enters into the void, it cascades into the void. And that cascading, as it moves from the primal source of the divine into the void, it begins to weaken, so to speak. And as it begins to weaken, as it tears down and flows down into the void, it begins to weaken. And as it weakens, there are strategic parts of a laser, right? A laser is only so powerful, only going to reach so far, and the farther it gets, the wider it gets, and the more it begins to break down and begins to fade away. God shoots that light into the void. This is also found in the Zohar. As it goes in, it begins to break down. And as it breaks down into 4 distinct realms. And those 4 distinct realms are the fundamental structures of reality. The first one is Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon is the primeval body of God. It's the way that we imagine God to be. It's when you think of God as a person, what you're imagining is Adam Kadmon. It's the first primeval glimpse of God as a being. Because before that, God is just infinite light, and God's utterly unimaginable. The first glimpse is Adam Kadmon, sort of like a negative image of God broadcast into the void. The next layer down is the realm of absolute, or emanation. Then down further is the world of Veriah, right? Where God is becoming more and more concretized, not yet physical, but more and more concretized. And then we get to the world of formation, where God is recognizable. And then finally we get down to the world of Asiyah, and we are actually in a subsection of the world of Asiyah. And that sometimes is called the 5 world or the 4 world, because our physical reality is distinct from all other 4 worlds, even the world of Asiyah. So the 4 worlds, the Olamot, are the ontological registers of reality. And what Luria imagines, and the reason why he imagines these 4 worlds is that every time there is a movement within the God, an evolution in the Godhead, a change in the Godhead, that change has to be understood as a logical, dialectical progression of how God is mutating, how God is changing. Because every time God interacts with something, that image of God, that aspect of God alters. And so what we get in the world of the various registers of reality is entirely different branches of the sphere. Now, I might pull this up when we get to the Q&A later. Is that one thing that makes the Lurianic system so mind-bogglingly complicated is that every register of reality has its own separating structure. And inside of every spherote is more spherotes. And so there are spherote inside of spherote inside of spherote. There are spherote on the backside of the Ra, which is the Sitra Achra, the most evil. It is again, for folks who are familiar with some mathematics, it's like a fractal. That anytime you zoom in on any register of reality, you can see the entire system of reality over and over and over again. And you have these enormously complex, what are called Ilanot, or tree systems. And those really complex Ilanot or tree systems describe the various spherote as they're interacting with each other as these various registers of reality. We can't go into the various time as in the development of the Godhead. Now, some folks who have some background in philosophy, folks who had some background perhaps in Hegel, this is going to sound really familiar because if you remember the logic, the progression of the logic of Hegel, Hegel actually commends Kabbalah as prefiguring his logic. Now, I'm not sure that's an indictment of Kabbalah or not, so depending on what you think of Hegel. But Hegel's system of the unfolding of reality is deeply influenced by the Lurianic sort of folding out structure of reality. Now, as God's light begins to travel through the void, what ends up happening is that the very structures that emerge to hold God's light, the very moment of the divine, as the light gets further and further and further into the void, the very structures that are meant to hold the divine light can't. They're just too far away. It's just like, I don't know, it's a moment where you feel yourself, you're holding on to something right and you feel yourself slipping off. There's a moment where you just let go. And that let go moment, the moment where the spheres, the actual vessels that hold God's light, because they've gotten so far away from the original source, they don't have enough energy, they don't have enough dynamism, they don't have enough they don't have enough strength to hold God's light. The shattering of the vessels as it pulls in, they overpower the vessels, right, and they shatter. It's like putting folks have ever seen this where you take a really cold glass vessel and pour really hot water into it, right? Or I'm sure you've seen folks throw hot water on a cold windshield because people don't know any better. But imagine hot water being poured into an ice cold vessel. The ice cold vessel is the vacuum, the void, the seamstone, and when you pour the lightning hot rays of God into it, the vessels just shatter. And that shattering forms what are called klipot, shards. And these shards of the vessel, these shards are characterized by disharmony and disunity. They're broken aspects of the divine. They're aspects of the divine that are localized. It's like if you'd imagine taking a part of your own personality and breaking it off. So just imagine your curiosity, right? You took pure curiosity, which is a pretty good trait, and broke it off and made it its own thing. Pure curiosity is a disaster because anything that's purely curious can make itself killed, it's going to hurt people, it's not going to have any ethics, it'll just experiment on people. And even love, right? Pure love, if you take it away and put it with no checks at all, it's too much. Any aspect of the divine broken away from the divine and then given its own reality, goodness, whether it's God's curiosity, whatever. None of these things can exist on their own. And the shards of these vessels, according to Luria, become evil. Now, they're not inherently evil, but because they're localized, intense versions of the divine, they shouldn't be allowed to exist on their own. And because they shouldn't be allowed to exist on their own, they go haywire. And these become evil in the Lurianic system. This is the origin of evil. The demons of the world are the klipot, the shards of the vessels that once held God's light, because they're just out of control. They're completely disunited, completely unharmonious. And so there's sort of like extreme versions of God. And so these demonic aspects of the demonic aspects of the Lurianic system are these klipot, and they are the object of a process called tikkun. And I bet you're already beginning to hear, right, where we're going to get to next, right, the idea of tikkun olam. Well, we are right at the very end of that system. The entire giant system of God sings so, and God pouring God's light in, and the entire process of the shattering of the vessel. We are at the very limit of that. And so at the very limit of that system, right? It's like a rubber up. And what happens is that we recognize, Lurianic Kabbalists recognize, that the shards of the divine, the klipot, can be rectified by engaging in the magic of the Torah. Again, it's like Luria is not sort of a mystic. He's a metaphysics that repair the world by engaging in the metaphysical act of engaging in following God. Because the divine law, the Torah is the system, it's like the source code of all reality. And if you follow it, if you do it correctly, it fixes reality. Reality is broken at some level. And so the fix is, according to Gloria, the very strict following of the Jewish law, of the Halacha, and of the Torah. So by following the Torah, we repair reality. This is where the phrase tikkun olam comes from. We're repairing the world. Now, I know that most folks hear the word tikkun olam and we think something like helping people or charity or something like that. But for Itzhak Luria, it's not just a fixing the world in terms of the social ills or doing social justice stuff. That's of course part of it too. But by having the right kavanah, by having the right concentration, by having the right intention, by doing some intention, turning apart, by things like by putting the film on, by observing the fast or whatever, all of these things help to repair reality. They fix reality at a physical level. They make reality deeper. And further, you begin to the world of the side system. The act of reparation, the act of repairing the world against us, build the world in which the Messiah can emerge. At some level, you can imagine that the Messiah if you've ever hung out with folks in the Chabad Lubavitch movement, I don't know if folks have ever been around Chabad people who like candles, felon. You can be walking around New York and I'll have a Chabad guy like on the street like, hey, you put your felon on today? And I'm like, no. He's like, well, you put your felon on now. Why would they bother you on the street to put the felon on? It's not because they're trying to do you a favor. They're trying to engage in tikkun olam. They think that every Jew, that means them, engage in the process of tikkun olam and put the felon on was usher in the days of the Messiah that much more quickly. And so they're trying at some level to accelerate. One can think about Kabbalistic ideas or learning to Kabbalistic kind of Jewish accelerationism. The world is broken and they're trying to prepare to accelerate that process by engaging in the experience. The process by which the Messiah comes. And the Simon Tall really does think that he definitely thinks he's a Messiah. He just thinks that he has to be a little bit more righteous. If you could just be a little more righteous, just think about that woman when he was praying. You just didn't think about it, you just memorized it a little bit more Mishnah, that he would have been the Messiah, he would have emerged as the Messiah. This Sunday you see him constantly. He's kind of also managed to be both incredibly self-deprecating and also incredibly arrogant. I guess that tends to go hand in hand. But sometimes he's I'm unworthy of being the lowest of the low. So, yeah, if I've just done this, I've been the Messiah. So the idea is that the Messiah is right around the corner as a result of this process. Now, of course, that idea got retrofitted into the liberal Jewish circles for social justice, but in classical Kabbalistic world, it has everything to do with strict obedience to Torah. Another key innovation in the Lurianic system is that Luria, it's like Luria is really obsessed with some of the more bizarre sections of the Zohar. There are three sections of the Zohar that are notoriously difficult to understand. Two of them are the intro, the assemblies, and the final is a section called Sifra Ditzniuta. And Sifra Ditzniuta is a relatively brief section of the Zohar that contains a long description of God's beard. And then there's another section that also contains a description of God's beard, but also God's face in general. And no one's really sure what is going on in those sections. They're really, really weird. Weird compared to other sections of Zohar. Zohar is weird enough, but it's like weird all weird. And it's like Luria develops a systematization of this idea of the movements within the divine face. That the divine face is actually reflective of metaphysical changes in reality, and that the divine face are the countenances of parts of Fim, that these parts of Fim are arrangements of the Sphirot, and those arrangements of the Sphirot are indicators of certain kinds of changes and developments within the divine. I will go ahead and say this, but the parts of Fim is without a doubt the most complicated part of the entire structure of Lurianic Kabbalah, because it's analyzing the Sphirot in terms of how they're arranged and how the various system relates to itself internally. And it is just completely difficult to understand. I still struggle trying to figure out, I know what the various configurations are, I know whatever. I know what the structures look like, but when you begin to analyze how they move and change in relation to other mystical stuff going on in the RSL system, it just becomes a maze. It just becomes a maze. So I have a real difficult time keeping track of what's going on in this sort of inner development of the Godhead. But what's important to note is that for Luria, God is not a thing, God is a process. And God is changing all the time. And so when God tells to Moshe Rabbeinu, right, I'll be what I'll be. Luria takes that really seriously. Yeah, God is changing. God is a process. God is not a thing, God is a process. And that process is reality, and we are part of that process. And just like you get angry, so does God. And just like you get, compassionate, so does God. And that the change of God from angry to compassion, or the change from a normal state of affairs to being angry, that change in your emotions can be mapped. And so, ditto with God, a change in God's emotional life can be mapped. And those mappings of God's emotional psychology or intellectual psychology are the parts of it. It's a very complicated part of the inner psychology, inner divine psychology. Also, famously, it's like Luria is going to reintroduce the concept of reincarnation into Judaism. Reincarnation is an idea that never really took hold in most of the Abrahamic faiths. Although there are tiny groups of people who seem to have believed in it at some point, but most of the larger Abrahamic faiths have rejected reincarnation for various kinds of reasons. However, in Lurianic Kabbalah, reincarnation is completely acceptable. In fact, it's part of the system. In fact, if you want a general idea, this is Chaim Vital's major work. This is the most systematic account of Isaac Luria's philosophy. This is the major work of Isaac Luria's philosophy as articulated by Chaim Vital, and this is the text on relation by Chaim Vital's teachings of Isaac Luria on reincarnation. Reincarnation. So, reincarnation is an idea that's reintroduced into Judaism. It may have existed earlier in some ways, but certainly Paul really introduces it via Isaac Luria. The idea is that every single person has what they call a soul root. And the soul root is a kind of aspect of your soul. There are 5 different layers of your soul according to the Lurianic system. And some of those parts of your soul go all the way back to the beginning of all creation. And various people have had that soul. You are, a root. You are a root, and there are things growing off the root. You're one of the things growing off the root. And there have been many people prior to you that have had the same soul as you. Now, the bad thing about that is they've committed all kinds of sins that you're now responsible for fixing. Because again, remember, Luria's system is dynamic. Just because you engage in 2 good once doesn't mean that you didn't do bad stuff before. If you do bad stuff, well, if you break the Jewish law, that further damages reality. And so there have been people in the past who really damaged reality. Maybe in your past life you were someone really bad. As Saul, by the way, the soul root was Cain, the first murderer. And so as you can imagine, Saul, soul root was Cain, had a lot to fix. He was the literal origin of murder. And so he had to investigate all kinds of things called tikkunim, reparations. And these reparations include everything from ascetic practices to reading certain parts of the Bible to engaging in mystical practices. And so the idea is that not only are you responsible for you being a good you have to make up for all the things that have happened prior to you. So every person that's had your soul prior to you, you are now responsible for figuring out how to fix all the bad things they did. Because all the bad things are still there. You're most apt to fix them. Now, how do you figure that out? You go to a mystic, a Kabbalist, and the Kabbalist will tell you who your soul root is, and they will tell you all the bad things that you've done, and they will give you tikkunim and how to fix them. Tikkunim can be anything from extra prayers to amulets to fasting. There are all kinds of tikkunim that we have. If you ever go to Sfat, if you ever go to Safed to the States, you can go to Kabbalists. I've seen signs in Safed where they will go and they will figure out who your soul root is. And they're alleged experts who know how to do this. I'll know how to do this, but I'll give it to them. It's fine. And they can figure out who your soul root is, and they will tell you that your soul root was Lamech, and you got the descent, and you were inherited descent. These are the kind of tikkunim that you can do, reparation you can do to fix the sins of your past lives. Reincarnation has entered into Judaism completely intact. It is a completely vile way of thinking about your afterlife. It's not heterodox at all. It's very normative at this point. And so reincarnation, with the rise of Lorena Kabbalah, is now basically normalized in a way that I don't think it is in Christianity and Islam. I think in Christianity and Islam, if you want to believe in reincarnation, you don't want to make a big deal of it. I think if you make a big deal of it, if you're a Catholic, whatever, you get in trouble. Whereas in Judaism, reincarnation is completely normalized. Now, I say it's normalized, but it's only normalized within the system where you would, if you want to find out who your reincarnation is of, you need to do the work of fixing all the sins and you may shout to learn all the bad things you did in your past life. Now, you do also earn the merit of your past life, but you also learn all the bad stuff too. This idea that the soul can survive death, and can be reborn, also it means that various other regions of the soul, you have 5 regions of your soul, some other regions of your soul can actually survive death and become detached from the other regions. And those detached parts of your soul, if you committed a lot of sins in your life, you become addicted to those sins. And those that aspect of your soul that becomes addicted to those sins actually can roam around and want to continue committing sins in the next life. This is especially true of sexual sin. But also gluttony and drunkenness. And so if you are a lecherous, drunken, bad person, and if you become addicted to those things, when you die, your soul will become so polluted that it will become detached from your other souls and it will roam around. And what does it want to do? It wants to continue doing what it did, getting drunk and having sex or whatever. And so what it will do is it will try to attach itself to other people because you can't really get drunk and have sex if you're a soul, so you got to get attached to someone else. And so when your soul attaches, your evil soul attaches itself to the people, the word for to attach in Hebrew is dabak, right? It's like the modern Hebrew word for glue comes from the same root word. Your soul dabak. It clings to other people, and that soul that clings to other people possesses them. This is the origin of the dibuk. The dibuk is an evil version of your soul, an evil aspect of your soul that roams around and tries to attach itself to the people. And the very earliest exorcism stories that we have in Judaism are actually from Satan. I've actually taught a whole class on spirit possession in Judaism. And if you want to learn more about this, I have an episode from my YouTube channel as well. But what you have here is demonic possession. Demonic possession is not the right word. It's not a demon. It's actually an evil dead person doing possessing. And so dibuk can become a big deal in the Kabbalistic world as well. But the opposite is true too. The soul of very righteous people hangs around your grave, and if you need to get some spiritual, some righteousness, let's say you're traveling somewhere and you know that your old paramour is going to be there and you don't want to like hook up with them. It's a real example, by the way. You don't want to hook up with them because you're married or whatever, and it's adultery. That's bad. So what do? You go into a graveyard of a righteous person and you lay on the graveyard, you lay on the grave of the righteous person, and you meditate on their soul, and you invite their soul into your soul, and they will impregnate you. This is called Ibur, and the soul of the righteous dead person will impregnate your soul with a little bit of their righteousness, and it will give you enough of enough of righteousness that when you go to face a spiritual challenge of committing adultery, you won't do it, because it's like a shot in the arm, a shot in the soul from the righteous person. And the righteous person will give you the spiritual power to overcome your failure, your whatever, your sin, and then they will come back to their graves. For folks who know about Buddhism, right, it sounds a bit like bodhisattvas, right? The idea that there are people who are enlightened in the Buddhist tradition, they become so enlightened, they don't become completely enlightened, so they can stay with the schmucks. Right, this is bodhisattvas. They don't go to nirvana, they're just here to help the rest to get a little bit more enlightened. And so these tzaddakim, these righteous people, you can go lay on their graves, and you can get a little bit of spiritual power from their soul, and go into your soul and help them. People do this to this day. It's a problem, actually, that people get caught sneaking into graveyards and lying on graves and soul power. Soul power is a cool 7. So at any rate, so this idea of Ibur becomes a big idea as well. So Tibuk, right, is evil souls becoming attached to your body. They can also get in animals, by the way. They don't like to be in animals. It's like not good in there, but they want to get into people. And Chaim Vital, by the way, also became one of the earliest exorcists in this whole tradition. By the way, he failed. He also get the Dybbuk to leave, and then as soon as the Dybbuk left, he will come back and repossess the person who killed him. And so there's all kinds of great Dybbuk stories. If you've never seen the movie The Dybbuk, it's one of the great classics of Yiddish film. Filmed in the 30s. In fact, died in college. And so it's really, as they remastered it, they've redone the subtitles. And if you've ever seen The Dybbuk, it's a great film from the 30s. It's a classic example of Yiddish theater and eventually Yiddish filmmaking. Probably the crowning achievement before it all went to hell. But The Dybbuk is a classic movie. We're getting close to Halloween time. It's Jewish Halloween. Movie watching, watch The Dybbuk. So the Dybbuk that I did is also from Lorena Kabbalah, but also as I said a minute ago, it's just Kabbalah. Lorena Kabbalah just became Kabbalah. It absorbed whether it's Abraham Avalak's Kabbalah, whether it's Vera's Kabbalah, whether it was other forms of Kabbalah. It absorbed them all. In some ways, transcended them all. It abolished them all, and it ascended above them all. And by both eliminating all of them and then conglomerating all of them into one thing, it became a new thing. And that new thing basically has become Jewish theology. If you've ever read books of Jewish theology, modern books of Jewish theology, they're almost always derivative of encyclopedias. And that's true of Hasidic people. That's true of Messianic people, components of the Hasidic people. That's true of hardcore Jewish rationalists, people like the Vilna Gaon, right? The hardcore rational guy. Also hardcore Kabbalist. Kabbalah, Lorena Kabbalah, is at some level just Jewish theology. Now, what's ironic about that, we'll talk about this more as we wrap the class up in a few weeks. Why aren't these texts available then? If at some level, Tikkun Olam and all these ideas are just basically now part of our theological landscape of Judaism, why isn't it you just can't go buy a copy of Its Society in English? Why isn't it you can't just go buy a copy of Barbaro's Artist of in English? Why is it that the entire 15-volume collective works of are not translated? For that. And we'll get to that in a few weeks with how liberal Judaism decanonized Kabbalah. It rejected Kabbalah. And that's part of what made liberal liberal modern Judaism, liberal modern Judaism, is amputation of Kabbalah. It's changing. It's not. It's changing in the sense that Kabbalah's got to be imported. They're being imported haphazardly. And the original texts are not being consulted. They're not being really translated. And so modern Jews who are interested in Kabbalah don't have access to the original texts. And that's a disaster. It's a real disaster. I mean, can you imagine if, I don't know, if the works of Thomas Aquinas just weren't translated in English? You have to rely on old Latin traditions and stuff like that. Would be a mess. Well, that's basically what happens. It's as if Thomas Aquinas had the influence he did in the Catholic world, but no Catholics have access to his actual works in English. A reliable. It's a mess. It's a real mess. So, and again, this is a standard volume of Eitz Chaim in Hebrew. There's no English translation. There's no translation. We'll talk about why there's not one. It's a passage. So, at the end of the day, it's a glorious version of Kabbalah. It wins. Now, I'm not saying it's completely systematic, but I'm not saying it's completely all worked out. There's still a bunch of Chaim Vital, systematizing the works at some level of our result. That becomes now. On the one hand, that's really Kabbalah 1. On the other hand, it's a disaster because most Jews who are interested in Kabbalah, at least in the non-Orthodox, have no access to it. It's a mess. This is a real problem. I don't know how it's going to get solved, but I mean, it's just now in the past 10 years that the entire Zohar was translated reliably in English. So this is a big problem. We'll talk about why we're in this boat and how we're going to get out of it in a few weeks. But it may just, in our lifetime, we may be getting out of that problem. It may take our entire lifetime to get out of this problem. So we'll talk about where it came from, why it is that we get how we got it. 6 years after Chaim Vital dies, the greatest articulator of the Lurianic system of Kabbalah, 6 years after he dies, a guy is born in Asia Minor, or is now Turkey, Izmir. He's born on Tisha B'Av. Which happens to fall on Shabbat that year, or that the Messiah will be born on the saddest day of the year. That the day of the year that we were born, every bad thing that's ever happened to us. But the great hope is that on that day, the Messiah will be born. That in the future, Tisha B'Av will no longer be a sad day; it will be a glorious day because that'll be the birthday of the Messiah. On Saturday of Tisha B'Av, 6 years after the death of Chaim Vital, Shabbatai Tzvi is born. And Shabbatai Tzvi is going to transform Kabbalah because he's going to become the Messiah. And not just become the Messiah, when I say that, I mean the majority of the world's Jews were convinced he was the Messiah. He convinced the world's Jews that he was the Messiah via his publicist in Gaza using Kabbalah. And he will become enormously influential. In fact, in many ways, if you think about Judaism as a religion, in some ways, as before Shabbatai Tzvi and after. And Shabbatai Tzvi is going to transform Judaism. He's going to transform so much of what's going to happen in Judaism. And so what we're going to do is he's going to basically shake Judaism to its core. Because as you probably know, he's declaring himself the Messiah. The vast majority of Jews believe that he's the Messiah. Many of them literally have their bags packed on the docks in Amsterdam, ready to go back home to Israel to live in the Messianic age. In 1666, he converts to Islam. And it is a titanic disaster. A disaster. Prior to the Holocaust, there's been no greater disaster than the Shabbatai Tzvi. No greater disaster. And from a theological point of view, it's a disaster. So, in many ways, right, you can think about Shabbatai Tzvi as the fulcrum. And I imagine most folks here have heard the idea that you can't study Kabbalah until you're 40. I'm sure folks have heard that idea. Well, notice that it's like Gloria died before he was 40. Clearly, he was studying Kabbalah before he was 40. Where do ideas like that come from? They come in the aftermath of Shabbatai Tzvi. Because the idea that Kabbalah is so dangerous that it could lead the entire Jewish world disaster. And that disaster, Kabbalistic disaster, will be heralded by Shabbatai Tzvi, false Messiah. We will turn to him and his arguments for his Messiahhood next time. Shabbatai Tzvi. Also, Frankism. Turn our attention to Shabbatai Tzvi and what's mystical heresy. It's kind of like on off the totally off the rails. So we will deal with Shabbatai Tzvi and his so-called messianism. Welcome back, and thank you for Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Again, if you'd like to support my work and provide accessible, free, and scholarly content on topics like Kabbalah, alchemy, and the occult, magic, and philosophy, consider supporting my work on Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.
ליצור את השם, להביא את השם החוצה, אבל לסרום אותו, שעובר משהו חלק, ולהוציא את השם החוצה. שפעם היו הולכים שבלונה, הפוך לזה, מולד, ואתה נותן את האור החוצה, ואז זה בסדר. אז מה, היום אפשר לעשות את זה? כי אנחנו מדברים על משהו מאוד מאוד עבר. אי אפשר לבחור מכאן. מה עושה היום? אבל שאנחנו לא נשתמש בו באימת דקה, זה אפשר לעשות את זה. אם אתה לא נכנס, אתה רוצה ואתה נכנס שמכיר, הלך לך שלי, עושה. וכל מיני, למה אני לא אומר שבן תרשים? זה כמו תעשו את זה אפשר גם השני. מה עושים? מה שהם עושים זה שלוקחים את זה קודם ולוחצים, ובאמת זה בעייתי, זה בעייתי, חוקר. אבל אחר כך הם מרחיבים את זה עוד פעם ומכניסים את זה חזרה. עכשיו יש לך משהו בצורה הזאת, בתחילת תתשים. ואז זה אחרי שבטוח זה כבר קשה ובוטר. אבל מה? אפשר לראות שפעם היה קודשי. ואז אבא שלו מתחיל לייצר, משהו בייציר, גילים כאלה. כל ריקים. והגילים האלה, בעצם שיח אחר אתה מושך את האור בצורה ששם מאוד מאוד איטי ומאוד ידני. אתה מושך את השיר החוצה, אתה לא יצא, אתה מושך אותו החוצה. תראה, היה לכם איך שהאבא עושה את זה ויכול ליצור את הסרטון הזה, זה היה טוב. יש לי בעיה, אני לא יודע. אתה יכול, זה אני חושב, בוא נראה קצת את זה חושב. ואני יודע, זה לא יודע, זה רוצה את זה, אולי תצליח עליו את זה. טוב, איפה נראה לי שתגעו לא נפלט. רגע, זה לא בסרט הזה, זה בסרט על הסרטון הזה? רגע, גרי, לא שלחתי לך את זה אותו? אתה זה במקום לא נכון. אתה יודע דבר, תוציא את זה לשם, תכניס את זה לגל לבטל חודש, נכון? אבל תכניס את זה אוקיי. זה לא משנה מה הוא מדבר. בוא תצטער. רוצים לראות את המגרד את השין הכיוון הזה. הנה. תסתכלו, תשימו משהו מעלה. רגע, אתם לא מבינים. שטנץ זה מפתות, אי אפשר לא שטנץ. עושים שטנץ, מבטלים, ואז עושים החוצה ואז ידעת. אוקיי, שטנץ זה של כל מה. הנה ראה. יופי. עכשיו. אוקיי. ודבר אחר שלא דיברנו על זה, לא, זה לא כל כך... שהרמה של השיר כדאי שנגיע למעט הביטויה. אז למטה, החיים יורד עד הגידול. ויש שיטה אומרים שהכוונה זה לשין, שהשין יורד על זה. ולכן אנחנו מקבילים שכדאי שגם החיים וגם השין ירדו עד למטה. האישור רוצה להשיג שהרבה אנשים, תראה אנשים, למשל או שהם לא בלבד. זאת אומרת, כן, 30 שנה לא בשביל ואני אומר, אולי כדאי לחשוב. שידור, תתפיל את סך הכל, זה התפיל שלנו, תדור בעולם, עולה. מקסימום 2,000 דולר. לא. אוקיי, זה קצת השקעה, כן. אתה לא פעם. ברכת שטאצה, כן? ברכת, זה לא היה בעיה 2,000 דולר. רק כדי שיהיה את ה-GPS ואתה נעשה, ויש אותם מאוד אחר. תפילי. כן? הנה, טוב. בוא נראה לא תמונות כל דבר, הנה. אוקיי, אפשר להתחיל כאן? אתה רוצה עוד כאן? מה אין עוד כאן? זה אומר מה? איפה הוא אומר? עוד לא. לא, אוקיי. אין לנו, זה יגיע. אוקיי? תמשיכו מעלה? לעזור אפילו במינסקה, אם אתה רואה שיש נקפה כאן, במעלה, אתה רואה שהחליט, אתה רואה שזה חליט, אז הוא לא תגיע עד בנם. אדם שאתה רואה שיש פה. בוא הבעיה, תקנו לסביבי, סופרים מסקי, התחלה של הקצינים. הוא נדוק, שולח את החוגר, בסביבי, הסביביות, זה יציב סבא, זה לא סתם שלם, יש שם מקום, יש שם מקום, ועושה ככה, ועובר על החור, אז הוא כבר ירגיש שיש שם בעולם. למה הם יצטור? יצטור, אוי אוי, האוכל, וכל ש... יצטורות! בואו, שדיברנו! הרצועות, הנה בדיוק כמו זה. למה הוא עשה תפילין בצבע החור? כי לא תמיד שלו. הרצועות, תמיד שלו. מאוד שבאמה, בין ירוקות, שואלים ונבול, כתוב מפורש, נכון ירוק. אז לא היה, אני חושב שיש לו קצאים, יש לו מנחם, אולי הוא היה מסתור, בצבע, אבל הוא ראיתי את הבנים של הגיבה של כל שזה סמלת. יש נגיע, אם הכל הזה, כל קצר, גם יוסי שם. Don't just choose. Died correct. שונות של תכלת, רבוי, אנחנו הולכים עם משכן התכלת. זה לשון של תכלת. ככה, קצת חול, לא נקיבל לא משהו. איפה הוא קצת נקרוא את המישהו למישהו בו, שנייה שוב. זה משהו לא בסדר, לא. הוא לא יהיה, היה שהבן לעשות הנצחות, כי הוא היה מואר, הוא היה מופת. הייתי קוראים לי, הוא שבליעזר, לא בלשון של הארצות, ולא בלשון. הארצות, לא בואי, זה קיבלתי משהו מצבע, סתכלתי זה היום, זה גם מגיע בתחיל הזאת. זה הרבה מה, שמתאים. לא, זה רגע, זה גול, אבל משהו מעבד, זה כל דבר בשבוע הבא, זה היה מאוד מאוד בעייתי להגיע לככל. זה מה שיוצא מהפילצון, הצבע הזה, זה יכול לא יצא. אבל אם עוצרים את זה, בקיצור, טוב. חשוב, הקמה, זה לא יכול לזהות, מה? סליחה, במליאה זה רע, אוי, כתבנו לא רע, מה אותו, לא היה אם זה אחד הזה, כמו שאתם רואים, הנה, זה לא כך, בסדר. אבל זה, זה לא יותר בואו. הנה, ונגד לבא. זה בסדר אדום. למה אדום לא? כאילו זה גם כדי לפעמים, את התפילה, אתה רואה, זה שווה. ואז, יאו. בואו נצפינים ובואי, אדום לא יהיה בקושי בסביבה. זה סיבות לבא פה. אז זה מאוד מאוד תפקידים. זה הקדיש שמודד ממש, שנבנת בצד הזה זה 62.7. לכן, לא יודע. עובדים על העין שלך. אז שאלו את הבריאה שבאמת זה בעיה, כי המכשיר הוא מרובע. ואת העיניים שלך חושבים שזה לא מרובע, כי הסירוצים לא מרובע שרים. אז הוא בא להכניס את העיניים. מה זה? אתה לא יכול? זה לא ככה, זה לא מגיע סגולה. הפריזמו, זה לא משהו ששתבל כמו שהוא לובש, הוא מולים, חוששים שזה יהיה חייב. כן. אני אחזור, איפה אני כל הזמן? יש לי מישהו מחשבה, נהיה מאוד מעניין. שמענו שזה 31 נקודה, כל זה 31. עכשיו, כל ארצה בריבוע, ארצה בריבוע שבארצות, זה 1.4 רבוע. אתה לא יודע, אתה בדיוק את זה גם? אז יצא 43.7. בקיצור, זה להיות 1.4 אז ככה בו, אבל מה שמעניין זה זה 30 סנטימטר כל צד. כל הארבע זה רק מה? קצת הפוך. קצת המידע שהוא אחר. זה יכול לחזור. ההוא הרבה יותר ארוך מהבלחון הזה. הבלחון יותר ארוך מהזה. אז זה מה שאני קורא אומרת. שזה לא מספיק שכל צד 30 סנטימטר, אלא גם הבלחון זה 4 ושתי הכיוונים. הם לא צריכים לבדוק את זה, כי הם נותנים זה לפי השלטון שלהם, שזה לא השקויה, זה בתקופה, אוקיי? אבל גם הספר, מה זה הספר? שאם אתה תופר את זה, אתה לא רוצה, זה פשט אחר, עוד פשט, בסדר, בואו נראה את עוד את זה בשביל לראות כאן. עכשיו, איך שתופרים, זה מספיק להיות מרובע, אתם רואים? יפה משהו. רואים את החריץ כאן? זה מישהו טוב, מחליצים את הספר, זה בדיוק מרובע. אמרתי לאמריקאים, אני אגיד לכם גם שזה לא באו מסכים שמיים, וכל עושים לשוב, פעמיים ביום, גם באנגלית, גם באומרים מזמן, כל אחד גם בשיעור הזה מה שאתם רוצים,
You're fine. Go for yourself.